All right. All right. It is now my pleasure bringing Mr. Titus Powell in his paper, The Morality of Human Nature.
A common subject that numerous philosophers have addressed concerns the state of morality in which mankind lives. Various philosophers have, throughout time, inquired into man's nature to determine his state of morality. It can easily be seen that multiple philosophers have made their own arguments that explain the ways of man's morality. While each of these philosophers have proposed a unique understanding of man's moral state, it can be observed that many of the Greek philosophers as well as theologians presented similar arguments on the matter. The common Greek conception of man's morality can perhaps most vividly be seen through the writings of Aristotle. Aristotle argued for the common Greek belief that one naturally becomes moral through practicing virtue. He asserted that the constant exercise of noble deeds will resultingly make an individual virtuous. Consequently, Aristotle's argument illustrates that he generally considered man's nature to be susceptible to attaining morality. In contrast, it can be seen that theologians generally argue that man has an inherently immoral nature. The theologian Blaise Pascal presented this general belief with his opinion that man is wicked through his ignorance of God. He argued that man's desire to separate himself from God left him into a miserable state of wretchedness. Clearly, there is a vast divide between the Greek and theological understandings of man's state of morality. Where the Greeks considered man's nature as readily able to become moral, the theologians rendered man's nature incapable of this. It is apparent that their strikingly different conceptions of man's natural state led them to these separate conclusions. While both positions may be rendered as reasonable arguments, Pascal's argument can be shown as the most valid. By investigating each philosopher's understanding of man's morality, Pascal's argument should prove to depict man's moral status truthfully. In viewing Aristotle's understanding of man's morality, it appears that he deemed man as readily able to attain virtue. Aristotle thought that one can develop a sense of morality if he habitually practices virtue. He observed that one can attain a virtuous state if he continually performs moral deeds. He stated that man's virtue must be acted in accordance with his nature, as one cannot act in contrast to it. He observes that no one's behavior can act against his own nature, so this virtue must then be exercised from him. Aristotle explained his position well when he remarked that nothing that exists by nature can form a habit contrary to his nature, for nothing else that by nature behaves in one way can be trained to behave in another. Although Aristotle asserted that man's virtue comes through his nature, he remarked that it arises through habit rather than by nature itself. Clearly then, Aristotle would agree with Pascal that one cannot naturally become moral. In spite of this, Aristotle believes that man's nature has the potential to become moral through continually practicing virtue, while Pascal had held that it is incapable of doing such. Despite Pascal's disagreement with this idea, Aristotle's position that man's nature is moral by his virtuous activity is extolled by many authors at that time, including the famous historian Plutarch. In his well-known work, Plutarch's Lives, Plutarch gave an account of the lives of various historical figures in order to exhibit the virtues that they lived by. Among such historical figures, Plutarch mentioned that the Athenian leader, Aristides, conducted his actions virtuously because he constantly exercised virtue amongst followers. As he remarked in Aristides' biography, of all his virtues, the common people were most affected with his justice because of its continual and common use. Therefore, Plutarch's remark, Aristides' just conduct, displays his opinion that virtue is established by habitually exercising it. Thus, with the support of other authors at the time, Aristotle claimed that man becomes moral through his natural habit of practicing virtue. Aristotle later provided further evidence that an individual's nature will reach a state of morality through exercising virtue. He affirmed that one must exercise virtue in order to become moral, as acquiring any art requires that one practice it. He believed that any art is obtained through exercising it, as he observed that learning an instrument requires playing it, or becoming an architect requires designing plans for a building. In the same manner, Aristotle asserted that one becomes just by performing just deeds, or brave by performing brave actions. Aristotle clearly described this process when he remarked, "The virtues we get by first exercising them, as also happens in the case of the arts as well. For the things that we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them." The way that Aristotle believed man attains morality appears fairly applicable in life. Individuals have an inherent knowledge that any art requires that one practice it in order to excel in it. One cannot naturally play an instrument, but must firstly have the experience of exercising it. This common understanding is not merely found in the writings of Aristotle, but also in those of the French philosopher Montaigne. Montaigne held the belief that an individual should only be considered moral if he labors to act virtuously. He considered that virtue involves admirably overcoming difficult trials for the sake of morality. As he stated in his essay on cruelty, for it seems to me that the name of virtue presupposes difficulty and contrast, and that it cannot be exercised without opposition. Plainly, Montaigne shared Aristotle's opinion that one's morality comes through exercising it, as he considered that virtue arises from the labor of overcoming trials. Thus, in consequence to the general understanding that one acquires anything by practicing it, Aristotle concluded that one attains virtue through exercise. In specific, Aristotle believed that the types of noble activities the individual performs will create distinct virtues in him. One will develop certain virtuous characteristics according to the kinds of ethical deeds he does. If one wishes to become brave, Aristotle said that he must act valiantly in situations that are dangerous. In the same way, if one wishes to become temperate, he must face situations that will allow him to avoid temptations. Furthermore, Aristotle observed that the way one performs virtuous actions also affects the status of his virtue. One can become genuinely brave if he excels in acting valiant, but if he demonstrates a meager form of bravery, he will become hardly brave at all. Aristotle determined this formed from his observation that any art is acquired based on the way one practices it. He reasoned, for example, that if one learns architecture by poorly designing a building, he will, as a consequence, become a poor architect. Aristotle expressed his idea well when he said that men will be good or bad builders as a result of building well or bad. For if this were not so, there would have been no need of a teacher, but all men would have been born good or bad at their craft. It appears that Aristotle considered that becoming moral involves acquiring specific virtues rather than developing a sense of morality in general. His argument displays that the process of acquiring morality involves steadily acquiring individual virtues over time. Aristotle's argument plainly shows that man is not exactly capable of attaining a complete state of morality, but is rather adapted to acquiring virtues that merely reflect a portion of morality. Thus, in accordance with Aristotle's belief that the types of virtuous activities an individual performs will create him moral in certain respects, rather than moral in general. In contrast to Aristotle's view of man's morality, Pascal believed that man lives in a dark state that cannot know God. He asserted that man's blind and wretched state will prevent him from knowing God. Pascal described that men in this state are left to themselves, unable to know anything about their Creator. He depicted them in this state as being, quote, left to himself, with no light, as though lost in the corner of the universe, without knowing he put him here, or he has come to do, or what will become of him when he dies, incapable of knowing anything. He believed that man is led astray from God by following his own carnal desires. Pascal stated that in this pit of darkness he fails to realize that he's naturally supposed to love God. Since he is unaware of this natural obligation that God requires of him, Pascal stated he will become unrighteous. The wicked state of not knowing God that Pascal described is shared among other theologians of his time, perhaps most notably St. Augustine. Augustine's biography of his rough journey towards conversion depicts the evil that beguiled him while he was blind to God. As he remarked in his famous work, The Confessions, I walked in darkness and upon a slippery way, and I sought for you outside myself, but I did not find you, the God of my heart. Without his knowledge of God, Augustine was left to feed the wicked desires of his soul. He was unaware of the wretchedness of his sin without this knowledge, so he resolved to follow his corrupt desires. The devastation that Augustine felt from his unawareness of God serves as evidence to Pascal's assertion that the ignorance of God leaves one in a wretched state. Evidently, then, Pascal, as well as other theologians of his time, believed that man's dark nature renders him unrighteous. Pascal maintained that man's nature was left in a dark and wretched state when he arrogantly rebelled against God. Man's desire to be at the center of himself led him to depart from God's will. In consequence, man withdrew from God so that he could find satisfaction in himself. As a result of this rebellion, God left man to himself, and his isolation from him has blinded him from knowing anything about God. In his isolated state, man has become subject to his senseless desires and is carried away to pursue them. Pascal described the wretchedness of man's separation from God when he wrote, and they are so far apart from God that a barely glimmering idea of his Creator alone remains of all its dead or flickering knowledge. The senses, independent of reason and often its masters, have carried them off in pursuit of pleasure. Pascal denotes that man's nature became wretchedly blind and encompassing as a result of his isolation from God. Pascal's belief of the wretchedness of pridefully rebelling against God is shared by St. Augustine as well. Augustine remarked that the worldly pride of his youth prevented him from seeing God. As he wrote in his Confessions, "Under the weight of my pride I sank down into the depths. You did not hear me, nor did my bones rejoice, for they had not yet been humbled." Augustine's arrogance made him only want to believe in what would exalt himself. As such, he could not believe that mankind is in a wretched state that can only be saved by God. Augustine recalled the necessity of being humble to be a Christian when he remarked, "By humble devotion return is made to you, and you cleanse us from our evil ways and are merciful to the sins of those who confess to you." Thus, Pascal believed that man's arrogance of rebelling against God puts him in a corrupt state of isolation. Although Aristotle and Pascal held remarkably different views concerning man's morality, both of their arguments may be considered reasonable. Aristotle's idea that one acquires virtue by practicing it appears reasonable, as it is very relatable to individuals in general. One can naturally observe that an individual obtains any quality by constantly exercising it. Aristotle's argument appears even more compelling, as it also provides a strong counter-argument to Pascal's conception of man's morality. It blatantly contradicts, with fair reason, the animalistic morality that Pascal portrays of man. While Pascal stated that man has become like the beasts, independent of reason, Aristotle contradicted this idea with his reasoning that there appears to be moral people in life that acquire virtues. Frankly, it does not seem that mankind is in a mindless state of wretchedness that is incapable of any morality. Aristotle's idea appears much more ascribable to individuals, as one can easily notice with him that there are individuals in society that appear upright. In spite of this fair counter-argument, Pascal also has held a strong argument that man is in a state of immorality. He held his position with conviction by viewing man's moral state in reference to God. As he believed that man's nature was intended to know God, man's isolation from God will reduce him to an immoral creature. As Pascal remarked, "We are full of darkness which prevents us from knowing and loving him. And so, with our duty of leading us to love God and our concupiscence leading us astray, we are full of unrighteousness." Pascal's argument for man's immorality appears valid as it takes into account man's natural duty towards God. It appears, then, that both Augustine and Pascal have strong reasons that provide their arguments with validity. Aristotle's case that man acquires morality from practice affords relatability to individuals in general. On the other hand, Pascal's argument references man's duty to God, which provides a much deeper meaning to man's state of morality. In the end, Aristotle and Pascal's arguments each contain opposing reasons that deem their positions as valid. Aristotle and Pascal's conflicting conceptions of man's morality arose from their different points of reference. They each made declarations on man's state of morality with reference to different ideas. Aristotle considered man's state of morality in relation to the general behavior of the world around him. He observed that one attains morality through practicing it, just as anything in nature is acquired in the same way. He conceived morality as a natural thing that is readily received by an individual. He viewed man's state of nature to be well disposed to become immoral, as it naturally acquires all of the things in the same way. As Aristotle stated, we are adapted by nature to receive them, and are made perfect by habits. Distinctly, Aristotle viewed his argument in a way that makes one's nature well suited to achieving morality. His view of man made him describe man's strivings toward morality as an act that appeals to his nature to receive it. In direct contrast, Pascal viewed man's state of nature as utterly incapable of becoming moral. He determined this by viewing man's state of morality in reference to God. He considered God to be the true standard of morality, which led him to conclude that man falls terribly short of any righteousness. As he observed that God is infinitely perfect in every aspect of his being, he saw that man's state falls immeasurably short in comparison. Clearly, he saw that the attainment of such morality is absolutely impossible for man's feeble nature. It appears, then, that Pascal provides a much broader perspective of man's natural state than that of Aristotle. While Aristotle perceived it in reference to the world around him, Pascal used the creator of the world to judge it. From Aristotle's perspective of the natural world around him, many actions that an individual performs can be considered morally upright. However, when one perceives morality in relation to God, the ultimate standard of righteousness, it becomes clear that no one is capable of practicing morality. The theologian John Calvin described the state of man's righteousness in comparison to God when he wrote, "But should we once begin to raise our thoughts to God, and reflect what kind of being he is, and how absolute the perfection of that righteousness and wisdom and virtue, to which as a standard we are bound to be conformed, what formerly delighted us by its false show of righteousness will become polluted with the greatest iniquity." The revelation of God's standard of morality removes man's deluded conception of his morality so that he sees it the way it truly is. Ultimately, then, it appears that Pascal provided a much more valid argument for man's state of morality than that of Aristotle, as his argument arose from a much more valid and broader perspective than Aristotle's argument. While Aristotle and Pascal both strove to determine man's natural state of morality, they each made vastly different decisions on the matter. Each philosopher held conflicting opinions regarding the way an individual attains morality. Aristotle deemed man as possessing a high moral status, while Pascal asserted that man is utterly devoid of morality. Aristotle's argument was illustrated from his belief that one becomes moral through constantly practicing virtue. He considered that the exercise of noble deeds will eventually make an individual virtuous. Aristotle's argument illustrates that man is naturally inclined to become immoral. In support of Aristotle's belief, it has been shown that numerous Greek authors during Aristotle's time have agreed with it, in both a historical and philosophical sense. Contrary to this popular belief, Pascal clearly believed that man lives in an immoral state, as he is ignorant of God. He asserted that man's arrogant desire to live apart from God left him to a wretched state of wickedness. His conviction is manifested vividly in the life of St. Augustine, as his life illustrates the wretchedness of being apart from God. In viewing both arguments, it appears that each side contains valid claims. Aristotle's argument is reasonable as it is relatable to an individual, as many can observe that one acquires morality through practicing it. Nevertheless, Pascal's argument appears valid as it provides a much deeper perspective regarding man's moral status. Pascal looked beyond what men perceive as moral by comparing it to God's standard of holiness. While Aristotle only perceived morality the way mankind sees it, Pascal observed it in the eyes of God. Thus, Pascal's portrayal of man's state of morality sheds the most light as it views it in the eyes of God, the true standard of morality.
Thank you very much, Mr. Powell. I would like to try to get you to clarify for us whether these two authors are directly contradicting each other or if they're talking past one another. At some point in your paper, you seem to say that they're simply looking at this issue from different perspectives. At other points, it seems that you're saying that they contradict one another. Could you clarify whether these two authors really are, in fact, saying different things about the same topic or saying different things about different topics?
They're definitely saying different things about the same topic in reference to the very base of man's morality. One of them clearly considers that it's immoral, while one of the other thinks it can be moral. While that's the same, I do think that the different perspectives that they have on the matter do come from different ideas and aren't from the same. They're not sharing the same idea on that.
Mm-hmm. Could you explain what's the different perspectives that they're looking at? Perhaps elaborate on how they're talking to different issues here.
I think as Aristotle didn't use God to understand ideas, he was always thinking of it in terms of what he saw around him. On the other hand, Pascal had this faith in a God, and so while Aristotle's point might seem more applicable to us and understandable, Pascal's assumption that God, his reference with God, ends up sort of judging it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Would you say it'd be accurate to say that Aristotle's dealing with, you might say, the practicality of how we as humans attain morality? For instance, if you want to become hardworking, Aristotle would say, well, just get up every morning, go out and work hard, and you'll develop the characteristic of being a hardworking person. Whereas Pascal is looking at things in more of a theological context, where you say You know, am I a good hard worker? He'll say, oh no, God is so much of a hard worker than you. You never compare to God's holiness, and nothing that you do is in any real sense worthy of being praised as a hard worker. Now, is that how you're breaking things out, or is there something different?
Well, I don't think that, and I don't think Pascal thought either, that morality is attained through exercising it. God naturally has it. He didn't have to work for it, obviously. So I think that just the way they viewed morality was completely different, and the way you attain it. So, in Pascal's opinion, it's simply just God intervening for us, whereas with Augustine, Aristotle, it requires work.
Mm-hmm. Were you saying that you would agree with the view that you say of Pascal, that if you want to attain a particular characteristic, a virtuous characteristic, that's something that you should have, that you should wait upon God working it in you rather than taking a more active view like Aristotle does?
I do think so. I do think though that God can work in us if we put ourselves in those kinds of situations. I don't think we should just sit back and expect God to do it all for us, where He'll make those virtues in us. I think we should, like Aristotle would want us to do, try to become moral through doing different things like these. It just requires God's intervention on us for that to happen.
Well, if you could elaborate on that, then perhaps, basically somebody says to you and says, no, Titus, I want to become hardworking like you are. What should I do? Give me A to Z. Are you going to counsel them in an Aristotelian fashion, or do you think that would be inappropriate for you to counsel with simply the exercise of the works of virtue?
I think that you should, even though it won't make you moral. I think it's something that God would call us to do as a way to glorify Him. I think that even though it's not going to make us moral, we should just recognize that it's something He wants us to do, and that the morality that we may have is all just from God.
Okay, but it's still more practically, you're looking to counsel somebody who's interested in attaining a particular moral virtue, such as diligence in work. Do you counsel them basically to read Aristotle? Say, Aristotle says that various characteristics come through habituation, you have to do it. So if you want to be diligent and hardworking, just go out and start taking jobs and be diligent and hardworking. You'll get that characteristic through time.
Yeah, I would say that following Aristotle's guidelines is important, and you should do that for sure.
Okay, and are you going to, as you counsel somebody, are you going to have qualifications that you bring in from your perspective from Pascal that you would add to that?
I feel like with morality and hard work, it's very different. Like, you're asking about like getting a job. I'm sure Pascal would think that working hard towards it can make you a hard worker. I'm not sure if that's like a moral virtue that, I think they're two different things.
So are you saying that trying to work hard and do diligent activity is not moral? If you're trying to attain that moral virtue, are you saying that going out and working hard and doing moral activity is not a means of attaining that moral virtue?
Not truly. It's a very false, small, I think, conception of morality we can get from that, but it's not true morality.
Okay, and what would true morality be?
It would just be God acting in us.
All right, so if somebody comes to you and says, Titus, I would like to have true hardworking diligence, would your counsel then be that they ought to pray to God, that God would give them that, and then to wait upon the Lord to work in them, to bring